Good morning. My name is Angela Lampkin and I'm here on behalf of QQI and Europass, and I would like to welcome you all to our 9th meeting of the Irish EU Reference Group for Agencies of the Department of Further Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science. And today we have a group of people who have come together for the last 9 years to share important updates in relation to the work that they do as a representative of their agency in the department in relation to Europe and all things European. And we begin to share those proceedings with you for the first half of this particular session. And then for the second half of the session, we will have our keynote speaker, Kun Nomden from the European Commission, who will give us, I suppose, a window into what's happening in the European area at a high level for all of our benefits this morning. So just before we start, I'd ask you to mute your microphones and camera, just to cut down on any interference, and to use the chat function for questions and comments. We will take questions perhaps after the first series of sessions, and we call them poster sessions, where it's, you might say, the highlights of activities going on in each of the agencies. The meeting will be recorded, so that's again important to note, and I think Catherine, one of my colleagues, is going to press the relevant red button now to begin recording the proceedings this morning. So again, good morning, and my name is Angela, and I'm organising this event on behalf of QQI, and I'm going to move on and move forward into the agenda. We have a busy morning ahead of us. We will give you a break, so I'm just going to take you through the agenda briefly. And just to recall that this particular group we are involved with are a group which come together with the terms, I suppose, of reference that we share our information on activities, and with a view to networking, collaborating and helping one another in our own contexts. And you'll see from some of the presentations that we're working quite well together in various aspects of our European agendas. We have poster updates now for you this morning, initially from colleagues from Léargas, from the NCGE, the National Centre for Guidance and Education, from QQI and from the HEA. We will have a break after around 11, give or take around 11, and then our second half of the morning will be, I suppose, more of the European perspective with our speaker from the European Commission. So really, without, I suppose, what I would call further ado, I will move on here, and just so you can see who we're talking about here, each of our presenters are, we'll start with Caris, who will speak on behalf of Léargas. We have Sheena Duffy from HEA. Orla Nikialik and Jennifer will speak on behalf of NCGE, and Orla Barry and myself then will pick up and finish off that session from QQI and from the Europass European Qualifications Framework perspective. So that's an all-female affair, I suppose, for the first half, and then in the second half then we will have our colleagues from the European Commission and Roisin Doherty from SOLAS, and Brian Maguire will finish the proceedings. So I'm just going to stop sharing my slides now, and I'm going to invite Caris to speak. I actually haven't seen Caris this morning. I haven't spoken to her, but I'm going to just invite her to begin her presentation. So just give us 1 minute now to get that organised. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Angela.
So I'm just going to stop sharing now, Caris, so you can present your...
Great.
That should be okay.
Okay, so I'll try and share mine now.
Here we go. Okay, and we just want to see that everybody can see that. I got it to slide share.
Is that okay with everyone?
Perfect.
Perfect, great.
Okay, thank you. I'll turn off my microphone and let you have the floor.
Thanks, Angela. So as Angela said, my name is Caris Hughes. I'm the Senior Communications Officer in Léargas. I'll give you a quick 10-minute update on Erasmus Plus submissions and themes, and then move on to two pieces of research that Léargas has recently produced, the School Education Impact Report and a report on the long-term effect of VET placements. So 2021 was the first year, really, of the new Erasmus Plus program cycle running from 21 to 27. It was affected by the pandemic, as you can imagine, as we run a lot of mobility projects, and also because a lot of projects that were funded in 2019 and 2020 extended the duration of their projects. So their projects actually went on further than anticipated. So we did see an impact on the amount of new applications that we got last year. We had 3 deadlines last year, and this is the result of the first deadline only. We had about 74 Erasmus Plus applications, as you can see there. And then, another lot in the next 2 deadlines. Those results aren't all confirmed yet. But what we're seeing, I suppose, is a fairly good level of interest considering the or successful applications considering the circumstances that we're in. But obviously, we have been below what we would term the last normal year, which actually was 2019, if you can believe it. The last year unaffected by the pandemic. So all of these projects that we see funded in 2021 and under the new programme have set policy priorities. There are horizontal priorities, which are inclusion, climate, digital and active participation in society. But each area of Erasmus Plus also has specific priorities that it's to address. And what we're seeing is that the projects that we're currently funding and we're getting applications from are very closely linked to these priority areas. What we have here, for example, is the last round of vocational educational partnership applications, which were very much around digital recovery from COVID, sustainability, agri-food, hospitality, tourism, things like that. So, quite closely connected to those areas, priority areas as set by the Commission. In school education, for example, we're seeing a huge amount of projects around environment and climate change, around inclusion, STEM or STEAM, ICT, digital skills. And then there's quite a lot around well-being as well, around mindfulness, not artificial intelligence, not connected to well-being, in my opinion, and art education, but also some of those more digital ones as well, around digital skills and artificial intelligence. Kind of looking at the program as a whole, what we're seeing is that there is a quite close correlation between the themes that come up in projects and the themes that are important in national and European policy. So, for example, with the previous Erasmus Plus program that ran from 2014 to 2020, we really noticed a shift in projects over time. That at the beginning of the program, there was a lot around numeracy and literacy. That moved on to a whole school approach as schools became more familiar with the construction of the new program. And then in the last couple of years, we've seen a real shift again towards intercultural and cross-cultural communication and to 21st century teaching and things like that. And for example, we saw that in 2017 when the government or the Department of Education released a strategy on mindfulness and well-being, that a lot of projects began to address that as well. So it's quite satisfying that you can see these, these close correlations between national and European policy and Erasmus Plus projects. That finding came from the school education report that I mentioned, which was conducted recently by an external researcher from Léargas. And what she did was look at how Erasmus Plus mobility has been used by schools in Ireland, and particularly at staff level. So, we know quite an amount about the effects on participants, on pupil participants, but this was really about how it supports staff. This will be published shortly and will be available from the Léargas website. There's a lot more detail on these slides than I can cover in this presentation. So if you're interested, do please go back and read them, but I won't be going over every single point. The key points really are that the aim of this report was to understand, as I've said, what was happening in schools using Erasmus Plus, but also to identify advice and guidance for schools that want to use it in the future. So it will be a very good resource for any schools that are considering getting involved in the programme. What the research found was that using Erasmus Plus for staff CPD has really helped to enhance the education on offer to students. But in other words, that by upskilling the teachers and increasing their motivation that is being passed on to the students, particularly in areas where the CPD might not be available in Ireland. That working with peers in areas that are, perhaps more developed in other countries is very useful. And conversely, that Irish teachers bring a huge amount to their colleagues in Europe with areas here that are very well developed. That relationship really helps to create further European partnerships, and we did see a lot of schools that had mobility projects actually going on to form cooperation partnerships. So that's a slightly bigger scale, more involved type of Erasmus Plus project as a result of their participation. The project coordinators reported that the projects had led to increased awareness of their work in the context of national and European priorities, as we've discussed, opportunities to learn from others, and really enhanced teaching and learning methods in the school. And that, in many cases, has gone on to have really concrete effects in schools. So, we're seeing things like schools using the flipped classroom method as a result of the learning that they've taken from these being involved in this project. Some schools have set up well-being spaces, and that there's become a whole school approach to well-being and so on. So those are some of the outcomes and impact that we've seen in this report, which, as I said, will be published and available from ourselves very shortly. The other piece of research that we've conducted recently was research that I did on the long-term impact of European work placements on skills, attitudes, education and career paths of vet learners. So this was part of a transnational project with 9 other European countries. You can see that's the international report is on the left there. The international report really focuses on how the vet system works in different countries and how vet placements are being used in different countries and what impact it has on learners in these different places. The national report obviously focuses on Ireland alone, and it looks at learners who were involved in vet work placements from 2007 up to 2018. So it's quite a long stretch of learners, and the focus of the report really is what happens after a placement, because vet placements can be quite short under Erasmus Plus. They can be 2 weeks actually is the average length of a placement, although some are much longer. So the question was, how does that affect people later in their lives? So looking back at them from this vantage point of a couple of years, generally, since someone has done a placement, we found 92% reporting a positive or highly positive experience. So these placements are still very well thought of, even years later. The main reasons for that are that they help to improve communication, team working skills, ability to work in an international environment, and particularly vet learners who have not worked at home before. So a lot of vet learners in Ireland are young, it's their first experience after school, perhaps. So for those learners in particular, the experience of going to a different cultural environment, working somewhere else, having their first exposure to their vocational area really has a huge impact on their lives. So even a short placement has a big impact on people in that situation. We found that when these placements work well, it's when there's a very close relationship between the student and the organisations that are involved in the placement. When the placement is aligned with the student's skill level, when it's aligned with their interests, they tend to perform much more or feel much more positively about it. We also discovered then that just over half of them felt that the placements had actually influenced their grades that they received in vocational training, and about 2/3 of them agreed that their participation had helped them in the world of work. So a number of recommendations came out of this report as to how we could improve this experience even further. One that I think I should really highlight here is that the importance of the peer-to-peer connection is huge, that sharing information through social and professional and online networks is really important. It's important, obviously, for the learners that they learn from each other, but it's also important for the people involved in vet projects, that having close relationships with others in this area is really important and really helps to improve the experience of the learners. Some of the other recommendations that came up were that some kind of vocationally oriented language instruction would benefit the learners, that some kind of project-based learning element might be helpful to learners to help them feel a little bit more involved in the mobility experience, because some reported that they felt their peers weren't as engaged in the experience as they might be, and this might be a way to address that. Mobility placements could be used more flexibly to meet the needs of learners, and I think that the move towards virtual mobility, given the circumstances we're all in, is something that can really be used to enhance the experience by perhaps virtually connecting learners and their host organisations before the placement starts. And then there was a recommendation around guidance, that greater guidance on how to present the mobility experience would be helpful to learners. And we've recently begun speaking to colleagues in the NCGE about exploring that particular recommendation. With the other recommendations, these are just the links if you want to access these reports. We also have print copies in Léargas, so if you would like to receive a print copy, do get in touch with me. We can send one out to you. But with all the recommendations, all of the findings and recommendations will be fed back, or are fed back, to the stakeholders involved, also distributed through peer learning, through events such as this, through TCAs, which is a function of Erasmus+, through accreditation, because organisations now can apply for accreditation in Erasmus+, and through, I suppose, Léargas's supportive approach, which is always to try and encourage organisations to get involved in Erasmus+. So that's where we are in 2021. These are our contact details at the end. If you have any questions, do get in touch, and I'll hand you back to Angela now.
Okay, thanks, Caris. Being the first presenter of a group is possibly often difficult as well, just to set the tone for the morning. But well done, and I think you've raised a number of aspects already for us to maybe to hold off and have in our discussion later in relation to, I suppose, impact of COVID and the difficulties you might have had in 2021. And I suppose we'll have to look at the beginning of a new year for 2022, that things are going to be better in the mobility space for all of the agencies who are involved with any forms of mobility. And I suppose we have to help you as well, maybe from a point of view of we're raising awareness. And I see that's one of the kind of key things that we can do across our organisations, is to help with raising awareness of the benefits of mobility. And I think some of the work that you've done has already shown the amazing benefits of mobility across Europe for those who do it. I'm not, unless anybody has any immediate questions, if they would like to make any comment, I would invite you to do so now. Otherwise, what we will do is we will move on. And I just wanted to confirm about the sound. I think from what I'm getting back is the sound is okay, and that everybody can hear the presentation. But just if you have a problem with the sound, perhaps turn off your video and just maybe do a cross-check. Sometimes if you just leave and come back in again, it'll improve the sound if it's not working properly. So our next speaker is Sheena Duffy from the Higher Education Authority, and I will invite Sheena to join us now. Sheena has recently taken over from Jerry O'Sullivan, who would have been previously involved with us for, I suppose, all our previous meetings with this particular group. And so this is Sheena's first occasion to say hi to us all, and we welcome you to the group. So Sheena, if you would like to share your presentation, we're good to go. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Angela, and no pressure taking over from Jerry, who was there for about 15 years. So this is my third week, and but I've been in the HA quite a long time, and I've also worked on Erasmus before. So my presentation today is going to focus mainly on Erasmus, but kind of on the wider European policy context. So I'll just share my screen. Hopefully you can see that.
Yes. Yeah, it's good. Thank you.
Okay, so when Jerry would have presented at this occasion last year, our parent department was very still in its infancy. It was only a number of months old. And in the interim, it has brought out its strategy, which one of the pillars very much focuses on international. And I've just pulled out two that very much focus on the Ireland's position within Europe and looking to really position Ireland as a leading knowledge economy focused on excellence in innovation, research and post-secondary education outcomes, aligning Ireland strategies with the European research area, and advancing with EU partners, and really embedding our education within that European education area. And when you look at goal 4 there, promoting the green and digital transitions, this is very much aligns with the objectives of what Erasmus Plus is trying to do. On a kind of more local level, as you may be aware, the HEA signs performance agreements with the higher education institutions. These compacts really allow higher education institutions to set out their ambitions under a number of objectives. And one of the objectives is very much around creating opportunities for international engagement. As some of you may be aware, there's legislation which will reform what the HEA does, and that system performance framework will be very much embedded within that legislation and led by the HEA. So that focus on international engagement will remain the cornerstone, and certainly higher education institutions have responded to this very much in the last number of years, setting out their objectives in this area. On the European level, I'm just going to focus on 3 areas. One, which is the European strategy for universities. This was a communication released within the last week or so by the Commission. As they always say, universities is to be taken in its widest sense there. So it's really focusing on the kind of higher education agenda. I'll also focus on the Erasmus Plus programme from a higher education perspective, and then this new European Universities Alliance, which Ireland has very much engaged with and has been very successful. So the European strategy for universities, it's really to support and enable universities to adapt to changing conditions, to thrive and to contribute to Europe's resilience and recovery. It builds on the first lessons learned from the European Universities Initiative, and I'll focus on that a bit more later in the presentation, and strengthen the European dimension in higher education and research. It identifies 4 flagship initiatives which will underpin this strategy. The first one being the European Universities Initiative. There's about 41 alliances at the moment. The ambition is to raise that to 60 by mid-2024. And there's another call underway. They've had 2 calls already, and the third one is underway. The joint European degree is again working towards a pilot in 2022 under Erasmus Plus towards a joint European degree, in particular the development of European criteria for the award of a European degree label. The legal statute for alliances, again working towards a pilot of 2022, which will bring a legal statute for alliances of higher education institutions. I suppose building on some of the existing instruments within some of the programs. And then the fourth one is this European Student Card Initiative. So starting by deploying a unique student identifier for all mobile students in 2022. This is the ambition. So regardless of where a student is attending within Europe, that the same student ID will exist, and for all mobile students in 2022, and aiming that all students in universities in Europe will have this unique identifier and a student card by mid-2024. So within the Erasmus Plus, and my colleague in Léargas would have referred to some of the horizontal priorities of inclusion, very much focusing on more flexible mobility formats. And I suppose the pandemic has probably, well, there's a lot of negatives that would have come out of the pandemic. There's a lot of positives that also came out. So the kind of acceptance of flexible formats of teaching and blended formats of teaching, which will really, I suppose, assist in a kind of European dimension. So the new Erasmus program will very much build on those flexible models, looking at more blended, a mix of virtual and in-person mobility and blended intensive programs, which will assist some people who may be not in a position to travel. Increase grant levels for those with fewer opportunities, as I said, fostering inclusive and innovative ways of teaching and learning, and expansion to all students in all fields and cycles, including doctoral mobility, which will be quite an interesting dimension of the new programme. Digitisation, focusing on developing digital skills of both students and staff, as I said, blended mobility, supporting projects to foster innovative curriculum design and teaching and learning practices using ICT, paperless Erasmus, and the digitalization of agreements. I'm only in the door, but I know this is already creating challenges, so we'll see how that ambition goes. And as I mentioned, the European student card. In green Erasmus and commitment to environmental friendly practices, looking at green travel where appropriate, Erasmus Plus mobile app to raise awareness amongst participants and really allow students to have access to a lot more information from their phone and apply for opportunities from their phone, and look at climate change and sustainability as a policy priority in all actions. And then this international dimension, which looks at cooperation with partner countries and includes building an EU contribution to human and institutional development in third countries. So there's kind of two elements: mobility, very much mobility to these partner countries, but also building capacity and bringing Europe's knowledge to other developing countries. So I've just highlighted the blended intensive programme because it's quite a new area within the Erasmus programme. So short-term physical mobility combined with a compulsory virtual component of collaborative learning. This can be decided by the group of the higher education institutions in the collaboration. It must have 3 partners with at least 3 programme countries, and it must have a minimum of 3 ECTS. It can be open to staff and students from higher education institutions outside the partnership, including partner countries, and it can take place at the receiving HEI or in any venue in a programme or partner country. So we've seen a little bit of interest in this. I suppose institutions have had some experience of this blended learning over the pandemic and can build on this to really develop opportunities for participants to benefit from both virtual and in-person mobility. And my last slide really focuses on the European University Alliances. These are flagship initiatives to build a European education area. They're transnational alliances of higher education institutions that come together to create an inter-institutional campus where students, staff and researchers enjoy seamless mobility, either through physical, virtual or blended, to study, teach, train, do research, work, share services at cooperating partner institutions. So it's really focusing on pooling expertise, resources, data, infrastructure across institutions to leverage all the institutions' abilities to tackle economic and societal challenges. And you'll see our institutions are already involved in a number of partnerships, have been quite successful and really have punched above our weight when you look at the size of the country and the number of European university alliances that we are part of. I think we've identified that only 10% of European institutions are involved, where about 50% of Irish institutions are involved. So it's quite successful. And really, just to give an example of what this means. So, for example, the Enlight programme there, which is includes the Irish partner of NUI Galway, by pooling the expertise with its partners of there's 6 institutions in the Alliance, this will bring together over 305,000 students, 25,000 academic staff to look at 5 flagship areas in health and well-being, impact of digitisation, climate change, energy and circular economy, and equity. And really it just gives a kind of a sense of the scale of these initiatives that will really give opportunities to our institutions to be part of an alliance that's so much bigger and gives them all institutions involved so many opportunities. So it's kind of a whistle-stop tour of what we've been doing, but I'm happy to take any questions either during the morning or afterwards, and there's our email address. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Sheena. We have a couple of questions in the chat. There's a question from Carmel Kelly inquiring of any thoughts at European level regarding making the European student card digital along the lines of the COVID vaccination certificate. An interesting question.
I would imagine so, and I would imagine, you know, this kind of European app that they're talking about, that will be part of that. So, you know, that you will have your student card as part of the app. And then there'd be, I think the aim is that, you know, you'll be able to apply for, you'll be able to see what opportunities are available to you and apply using the app. So I would imagine.
Yeah, I think our colleague Cohen, who's going to speak to us after the break, certainly will have something to add on that, I think, as well. But I think digitisation of the card certainly makes sense for a lot of people. Hannah McGee has a question, and I'm not sure if we'll be able to answer it, about the European student card. Will this be available to students in the UK, and if, in brackets, if not Northern Ireland, what the situation would be? It seems to be it should be a real asset, she says, for international student recruitment. So I don't know whether we have any comment, or she's raising the question with
us. I suppose that's something that's forever changing, and we really have to keep an eye on that. I suppose, you know, it may be the case that if it's successfully rolled out within Europe, that the UK may want to be part of it, but I suppose there's no onus or obligation on them to really be part of that. I suppose it'll depend on how successful it is within Europe, and if it's seen as a valuable asset.
Okay, we have a comment from Mary Stokes. Again, there's quite a long comment there, but useful to note work and discussions during several recent NCGE hosted forum on guidance, about lifelong guidance and the Sustainable Development Goals on green guidance. So there's some food for thought there, and maybe Jennifer can pick up on some of that in her presentation in a few minutes. And then Anne Holt from the Department of Social Protection is asking about employers, and to know if any employers are involved in any way in the university alliances.
I suppose they're not part of it's not a necessity for the application process, but I would imagine the fact that they're tackling these big economic and societal challenges, that employers will of course be part of these alliances as they go forward.
Yeah, it certainly makes sense. I mean, it's very interesting at this stage to see how these things. Now, there's another question coming in from Gavin Clinch. An issue with a digital card for students is that they aren't always accepted for discounts by providers. We looked at this in Sligo a couple of years ago. I'm not sure actually what he means by discounts by providers, but I think if Gavin wants to turn on his microphone and ask the question or raise the point, Gavin, you'd be very welcome. Hello.
Hi, thanks.
Good morning.
We looked at this particularly for our online students, to give them a digital card, and we found a very good provider, a very good solution. But the issue that came back from Student Union is that they weren't always accepted by, say, Irish Rail when they were looking to buy tickets.
I know what you mean. I know
things may have moved on.
Yeah. Early days yet, maybe.
Things have hopefully moved on. But yeah, it was just to note that we had looked at it, and we had to eventually go with a physical card.
Okay, interesting. Well, I say the digital COVID certificate is, I think, a prime example of what does work. So now, and Brian has just put a post in about it as well. So there's a good bit of discussion going on about this particular topic. And I suppose what I will do now is we will put a hold on some of that discussion, because we're going to move on, and we're going to invite Jennifer McKenzie and Orla Kealig from the National Centre for Guidance and Education, who are going to give us their perspective and updates from the National Centre for Guidance and Euroguidance, again being the European dimension for them this morning. So thanks, Jennifer. You have the floor. Thank you. Can't hear you yet, Jennifer. You might need to put your microphone on.
Yeah, of course I'm on mute to start off. Just checking.
You're grand. You're fine. We're in business. Thanks.
It's great to be part of this. As you say, it's the 9th event. I remember the first day we all sat down saying we're all trying to get our message out. We need to show that we are collaborating on the work that we do at EU level here nationally. So it's great to have another event like this 9 years in a row. So well done to everybody involved. So my name is Jennifer McKenzie. I'm the director of the National Centre for Guidance and Education. And as part of our centre in NCGE, we host the Euroguidance Centre for Ireland. My colleague Orla Kealig will go through the details of the Euroguidance Centre, but it is ultimately an EU Commission funded network of guidance centres across Europe. So in our agency in the NCGE, we're an agency essentially of the Department of Education, but we work very closely with colleagues across the Department of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science. With the split, our work still crosses both departments. Part of our role is to support the development of guidance policy in education and the training sector. So that is about looking at what is good guidance in schools, what is good guidance in the FET sector, what is good guidance in the adult guidance sector, and also working with our colleagues in Department of Social Protection, local employment services, and internationally to look at, well, what does good guidance look like for adults who are not in school or education, but are in the workforce and want to come back into education or want to progress with their own work and employment opportunities. As part of that work to support good practice, we develop guidelines such as the Whole School Guidance Framework or guidelines for good practice in relation to psychometric testing or working with adults in the adult guidance services. We also represent Ireland at the EU Commission and internationally on guidance. So where there's workshops or conferences, the NCGE is the agency that will represent the Department of Education in relation to guidance policy. For example, as part of what was called the European Lifelong Guidance Policy Network, which was a network of member states brought together and funded by the European Commission, we were very actively involved in the development of guidelines for policies and systems development of guidance services across the EU. And we were involved in the development of guidelines on career management skills or career development skills, depending on what sort of phrase you want to use, and also what does quality assurance and what does evidence for guidance look like. And in bringing that into our thinking, the talk over the last couple of days about the Leaving Cert and the CAO deadline date for registration being yesterday. When we talk about guidance, most people automatically think about career guidance in schools and people making a decision, what am I going to do outside of school? But part of our role in supporting guidance counsellors in the school community is to encourage people to consider, well, what else is available to me outside of general education and training? What about work mobility? What about training opportunities abroad? So Orla will talk to you about that later on. As I mentioned, we host the Euroguidance Centre for Ireland, and as part of that work then, with our colleagues, with Angela in QQI, we are also members, as the director, I'm member of the EU Europass Advisory Group. So we work with the Commission at advisory group level and various working groups in relation to developments where guidance has a role to support, because the reality of it is when all of the programmes are available across all the universities, In order for students to be aware of and choose the right one for them, guidance is crucial. So guidance has to be at the centre of all of this work. So moving on then in relation to an EU focus in guidance. As I mentioned, there's the European Advisory Group. I think we've skipped a slide, so I'll just keep going. The European Advisory Group. We also refer to what the European Council defines as guidance. And this is more than helping people to make a decision about a course. So the definition, which is crucial to all of this work, is that guidance is a range of activities that enable citizens at any age, so anybody from the age of 12 to 92, at any point in their lives, to identify their capacities, competences and interests, to make educational, training and occupational decisions, and to manage their individual life paths in learning, work and other settings in which these capacities and competences are learned or used. And that was a definition signed off back in 2004 by the EU Council. And that definition has supported the development of guidance programmes, thanks Orla, and guidance practice across the EU and particularly in Ireland. At the moment, in particular, NCGE is working with CEDEFOP, which is the European Commission Centre for the Development of Vocational and Educational Training. CEDEFOP provide many resources for guidance practice and guidance delivery in things like labour market information across the EU. We're also, as director, I'm member of the CEDEFOP Careers Net, which is a network of experts in lifelong career guidance and career development, coming together to look at issues across Europe and internationally that can help us to inform CEDEFOP, develop guidelines on good practice. As part of our work, we've been involved in collaboration with international organisations, including the European Commission and CEDEFOP, the European Training Foundation, the International Labour Organisation, UNESCO and the OECD, in the publication of the revised edition of the document Investing in Career Guidance, which is an internationally published document to highlight the value and the importance of career guidance at school and vocational level and at higher education and with adults in the employment sector. So looking at how is career guidance relevant. As part of our work also then, we engage from a European perspective and an international perspective with our colleagues in Australia, in Canada, internationally, and in the UK. We tend to forget that unfortunately with Brexit, our colleagues in the UK are no longer automatically part of these networks, but very much still part of the work that we do. And part of that work is to maintain the EU focus on lifelong guidance and bring that focus into a national level so that we in NCGE can inform practice in schools and in the FET sector and in higher education. And as Mary mentioned in the text and Angela mentioned there earlier, we also host the National Forum on Guidance, where we bring together stakeholders to look at how we can develop the guidance services. So I'm going to hand over to Orla to give a particular focus to the Euroguidance Centre and on how guidance is relevant then in supporting mobility. So thanks very much, and I'll hand over to Orla.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer, and good morning, everyone. As Jennifer mentioned, my name is Orla Kelly, and I'm the Euroguidance Officer in the National Centre for Guidance and Education. So just for those of you, I suppose, who haven't heard of Euroguidance or aren't familiar with the network, we are a network of over 60 centres across 33 countries. And Euroguidance Ireland then is hosted by the NCGE, and we're part funded by Erasmus Plus and the Department of Education. In terms of our main target groups, as you would imagine, guidance practitioners, guidance counsellors are a key target group, along with those individuals who are interested in studying abroad, or in the case of our work with the European schools, those who are interested in coming back or coming here for third level and further education in Ireland, as well as policymakers. In terms of the objectives of the network, key objectives will be to support the competence development of guidance practitioners on that European dimension of lifelong guidance and foster connection with Europe, providing CPD information, resources and materials to the guidance community here in Ireland, and also sharing that at a European level. As Caris mentioned earlier, the value of international mobility, raising awareness of that is incredibly important to us. And as I think was mentioned by Caris as well, NCGE are delighted to work with Léargas and Caris, hopefully on, I suppose, responding to some of the findings of her recent research in that respect. And myself and my colleagues in NCGE make every effort to work with including and embedding a European element, European dimension of guidance into national activities to ensure that everybody is up to speed on the European side of things. So I'm having a little difficulty here with the slide, so I'll just move along if I can. In Euroguidance Ireland, I suppose, as Jennifer mentioned, a lot of the work done with other European networks. We're also, I suppose, active participants in the European Euroguidance network. At a more local level, then, we work in collaboration with a lot of the other agencies here today, as well as other national stakeholders. So we work closely with QQI, Europass, with EURES, with the HEA, Eurodesk, Léargas and others. As I mentioned, we coordinate the provision of the guidance service to the European schools, and that is done on behalf of the Department of Education. And this year is now its second year that the delivery has taken place entirely online. So we're happy that it has been a successful pivot as a result of COVID, and that has been an interesting experience for us. We look to provide opportunities for guidance counsellors to network and learn from one another with their colleagues in Europe. At our recent TCA, which was hosted in collaboration with Léargas, we have a study visit, an academia study visit coming up for guidance counsellors in March around the theme of transitioning guidance. And as Jennifer mentioned, there's also an emphasis on European policy. And in the case of the last 2 years, there has been a European audience at our national forum on guidance. We obviously disseminate information on European initiatives via our various bulletins and communications to our cohort, and promote European tools, highlight good practices, and of course this year in particular, and working with QQI Europass, we'll be focusing a lot on the promotion of and awareness building around the Europass developments. I'm on the Learning Opportunities Working Group for that, and as Jennifer mentioned, she has an active role in the Europass Advisory Group, also looking at promoting Erasmus and the other various European initiatives to the guidance community. And lastly, we attempt to develop programmes, resources and CPD to support the inclusion of a European element in the practice of Irish guidance counsellors. So I know that one of those resources that we have has been brought to your attention here before, and that is EuroQuest. So just to give you, I suppose, an update on that. So EuroQuest was formally launched in 2020. It promotes educational mobility across Europe. It is designed to be integrated into the transition year programme, linking guidance with other subjects, with Europe as a common theme. So giving students an opportunity to explore the values and origins of the EU to foster that connection with Europe. Introduces them to opportunities that exist to study abroad and the various supports that are there and tools, European tools that they can use. It provides them with, an opportunity to prepare for a learning opportunity abroad, in that it looks at the practicalities dealing with culture shock, homesickness, etc. And then there is a specific guidance piece in looking at how to research those opportunities. To date, we've had 3,400 students register to the resource, and to gauge the impact that the resource is having, we asked them a series of pre and post questions. So I'll just give you a sense of what we're finding from those now. I from our perspective, we feel it's quite positive. It does show a need for the information to highlight these opportunities that exist, but students have reported that there has been an increased sense of their knowledge or awareness around the European Union, around their rights as European citizens to work, study and travel within the EU, and importantly, their knowledge of mobility opportunities that are available both through institutions here in Ireland and Europe. Their knowledge of supports in relation to mobility, the transferability of skills and qualifications, as well as the benefits of a mobility period. There has been a positive impact on all of those. And we were also happy to see that their motivation to potentially take part has also been impacted positively. We have a number of other resources on our website, which you're welcome to visit. Classroom resources to incorporate a European element into the guidance practices and ensure that learners are aware of the learning opportunities that exist for them in Europe, as well as webinars with input from Léargas, QQI, and next week from the Department of Foreign Affairs. We're working on, and I think Angela will mention it, an interagency collaboration, a new publication together as well. And our resources are available in English and Os Gaeilge. So that is a very quick update from me. If you would like to get in touch, we'd love to hear from you, and our details are here on the slide. That's me, Angela.
A lot of material to digest there, Orla, and I think people will need time to review the slides after this event today. And I'm interested there particularly on the EuroQuest programme, because I saw a letter in the Irish Times in the last couple of days from, I think her name is Barbara Nolan, in the Office of the European Commission, calling for more education in schools for about Europe and about the affairs and the workings of the European Parliament and Commission, etc., because people are just saying we don't know enough about it, and I would certainly agree with that. I think the EuroQuest is a really useful tool in that regard, that maybe we need to promote it more in the future. There are a couple of questions there. One is from Elaine Hines, and she asks about the guidance to European schools and how the further education is part of this. So maybe you might have a comment on that.
Sure. Well, the guidance service to the European schools is delivered in November, December each year, and it is delivered by qualified guidance counsellors here who are working in schools and working closely with young people. It's anyone who is a child of an Irish citizen in one of the European schools is eligible for the service. And in terms of working with it was the higher education.
Can you say a little bit more about the guidance to European schools? Yeah, and I think and further education and training is part of that.
So we explore, I suppose, in more than in the usual guidance session you would have with the 5th or 6th year students, we would present all of their options to them. So you can actually go on to our website, euroguidance.ie, and you will go into the European schools section, in which you'll find the PowerPoints that are used and the information that we have. But effectively, it is like exactly as you would do post-primary level here, when discussing the various options that students have available to them after school, a number further and higher education options. Obviously, this year there's big questions from them as well about how their entry will be impacted by the grades and the change of the Leaving Cert. So although we think we have everything covered, there's always new questions to cover. But I can put the link in the chat here if that person would like to maybe have a look. Oh, okay. David is already on it there, actually.
Okay, and there's another question there in relation to, possibly for Jennifer, which relates to the future guidance counsellor and the professional qualification of guidance for guidance counsellors, masters in guidance counselling. Will counselling still be offered by professional guidance counsellors? Not sure that the EU system offers counselling as part of their services. From Phyllis Farrell.
Yeah, thanks for that, Angela, and hi Phyllis. Good to wave at you and see you there virtually. I suppose for clarification, there is a misunderstanding that guidance counsellors across Europe don't do counselling. They do. Each country has a level of responsibility for its own training and qualifications of their guidance practitioners. It's up to each university and each country as to what that qualification looks like. But for example, in Finland, the training and qualifications are very similar to those that we have here in Ireland. In relation to will the professional qualification of guidance counsellors will be upheld, that is outlined by what is called the Programme Recognition Framework, and I can send you on the link to that. I'll put it in the chat in a few moments. And that's the Department of Education and DFHERIS's requirement of a qualified guidance counsellor in Ireland, which includes guidance counselling skills as part of the postgraduate qualification. There is no intention for that to change at this point. In relation to what a guidance counsellor in the future will look like, there will have to be discussions in the FET sector as to the different roles of guidance counsellors, because currently a guidance counsellor in a PLC has a very different role to that of a guidance counsellor in adult guidance programme, which is very different to a role of a guidance counsellor or an advocate in the Youth Reach and CTC programme. So that's a piece of work for the FET sector that is different. But the EU developments are very much reflecting that there is a need where there is a lack of counselling skills training in some countries. There is a recognition now of the need for that counselling skill. So actually the Irish model is the model that is being looked at as the most appropriate for guidance counselling across the EU, as opposed to the other way around. But I'll put up the link to the PRF as a reference point anyway. So hopefully that'll help.
Okay, and I have a final comment I'll say at this stage from Anne Holt from the Department of Social Protection again, which is: would you see a value of collaboration with EURAS to promote the broader European services through EuroQuest?
Absolutely.
I think the answer is yes.
Absolutely, I suppose it's something we are conscious of, and I think Angela and Anne in our interagency work as well, that's something that we are trying to develop, and that new publication that we will hopefully have out by Europe Day will look at maybe broadening the idea of mobility opportunities, to look at working in Europe, studying in Europe, volunteering, and other opportunities that are there for in this particular case young people to explore those options. There would be mention of EURAS within EuroQuest, but absolutely, Anne, I'd love to speak to you more about that.
Yeah, I think this is one area that any of us with the Euro related projects, and that's why we're here today, is to share these ideas and to connect. And if we can come out of this meeting today with a number of new connections and new ideas of how we can work together, that's a real achievement as far as I'm concerned. So thanks very much, Orla and Jennifer, for talking to us. Again, as I say, we're moving on now, and we're going to take on what I would call the QQI part of the discussion, and I want to introduce Orla Barry to you. Orla has recently joined QQI, and she's joined my team in the Learning Qualifications, Information and Learning Opportunities unit. And she and I suppose, are working very closely together on the broader, what I call Europass EQF agenda. And Orla, I gave her the task, I suppose, and she took it on enthusiastically, of doing this presentation today and giving you the overview of what we're doing, if you like, in QQI. And I suppose there's connections in relation to what's gone on already this morning, and there'll also be connections to what will happen after the break as well in relation to the higher European agenda and policies. So Orla, I will let you take the floor and share your screen, and thanks a million.
Thanks, Angela. So it's great to hear that it's the 9th meeting of this group. As Angela said, it's my first meeting of this group, and I thought I would get away with being the new kid on the block, but I think Sheena beats me substantially. So I joined QQI in August, and I suppose there was a little bit of a reorganisation, as Angela mentioned, and I'm working in her unit now, and kind of got some of these new functions recently, but still Sheena is beating me at just 3 weeks in her role. So I'm going to chat to you today a little bit about the work of QQI in relation to kind of EU level work, and focusing on our priorities coming up, and those will focus very much around the National Framework of Qualifications and the European Qualifications Framework, the Irish Register of Qualifications, and a little bit of information about some priorities we have upcoming that are a bit innovative for the QQI regulatory model. So first off, QQI has a new strategy which we launched just this year, covering the period 2022 to 2024. And although there are a number of strategic priorities outlined in that strategy, and I would encourage you to have a look at it if you have the time, the strategic priority that's most relevant to this area of work is the one around information. So the strategy is really looking at aiming to provide better information and opportunities for learners, which is a priority for QQI, which aligns very nicely with the work of Europass and the European Qualifications Framework. One of the pieces of work we're working on across these kind of next 2 years is we have a project that combines the work of Europass and EQF, aiming to promote the Europass platform and tools and the EQF to stakeholders and the general public in Ireland. So that's very much around providing that information and getting the information to the people who need it, looking at promoting that new Europass platform, and furthering the agenda of the EQF through planned activities aligned to the strategy of QQI and our parent department. So the work packages that arise out of this project are promotional activities and dissemination about Europass, further development and implementation of the NFQ, integration of the Irish Register of Qualifications to the QDR platform, and integration of Europass activities with Euroguidance. So the two I'll be focusing on primarily are the further development of the National Framework of Qualifications and the integration of the IRQ to the QDR. A lot of acronyms, but hopefully through my presentation I will explain them to you what they mean. We're not great in QQI for keeping things simple. We love an acronym. So our priorities are around developing a scheme for listed awarding bodies, which I will be talking to you about, the ongoing promotion and communication of the NFQ and its relationship to the EQF, and the updating of the Irish Register of Qualifications to ensure its accuracy. So I'm going to start with the NFQ, and I think a really important piece of information that maybe people don't know about or have missed so far is that the NFQ fan has been updated. So the NFQ fan diagram is QQI's most powerful communication tool in relation to our National Framework of Qualifications, that 10-level framework. And it's been updated essentially to reflect the changing landscape of education and training in Ireland. The main changes that you'll see are that the junior cycle now spreads across levels 1 to 3, and we have updated the language around who makes awards to reflect the introduction of the technological universities. And we're hoping that the language in this framework will now kind of be future-proofed to future changes potentially that will come down. But this NFQ fan diagram update is important. It should be communicated as much as possible to learners. We'll certainly be seeking to update it. It's communicated on our website, and if you haven't seen, we do have an updated website as well, which we're hoping makes information easier to access. So please feel free to look at our new website as well as our new NFQ fan. The NFQ is an important tool in relation to the European Qualifications Framework. So the European Qualifications Framework is essentially a translation tool which communicates the levels of our framework to the European Qualifications Framework, which in turn is referenced to other national frameworks in Europe. So it's about understanding the levelling of our qualifications framework to that European Qualifications Framework. The EU Commission are planning to undertake an evaluation of the European Qualifications Framework this year. The evaluation will focus on the interaction between the EQF and national frameworks across the EU, and it'll look to continue working on delivering transparency in relation to levelling and learning outcomes. And you might remember, I think at last year's meeting, a presentation was given about our referencing of our national framework to the EQF to ensure that our framework continues to be fit for purpose in relation to the EQF. So it's great now that the EQF is also starting to look at its relevance to the national framework. So it's an important piece of work that will continue to make our NFQ and its relationship to the EQF as valuable as possible. Listed awarding bodies is maybe something people don't know an awful lot about. And essentially this is powers given to us in amending legislation in 2019 that have yet to be enacted, and it essentially provides access to our national framework of qualification to other awarding bodies. Many learners in Ireland undertake programmes that lead to awards of bodies that are not currently included in the NFQ. That would include qualifications made by professional bodies in areas such as law and accountancy, and also vocational and technical qualifications which are issued by UK awarding bodies. The 2019 Act enables QQI to establish a new category of awarding bodies, which will be called listed awarding bodies, who on a voluntary basis may obtain regulated access to the NFQ for their awards. The formal inclusion of such awards will benefit those learners who hold the awards and will further develop the National Framework of Qualifications as a mechanism for relating learning achievement and enhancing qualifications recognition. So we're at the very early stages of designing the policy and procedures and processes that will underpin the listed awarding body scheme, and we do hope to go to consultation at some point during 2022. I won't be any more specific because I don't want to tie myself to something. But I'd certainly really appreciate anyone getting in touch with me who may be interested in this scheme or who just wants further information, because we are trying to get a handle of who our stakeholders in this area are so we can communicate with them as best as possible in relation to this new scheme. So I'll keep it simple in terms of trying to describe the process. Essentially, QQI will have to make two decisions. If we are to establish a listed awarding body, we'd have to decide that that body is a suitable body to make awards, and that the awards that they propose for inclusion in the framework add value to our National Framework of Qualifications, and that they are meeting needs of learners, the wider society, and in keeping with government policy. So it will be a process that will consult and consider the perspectives of regulators, funders, and government. But I won't go into any more detail than that because it is quite technical, and I'm sure there's very few people besides myself who enjoy such technicality. But if anyone does wish to have such a conversation, please feel free to get in touch with me. The next thing I'm going to chat about is the Irish Register of Qualifications. So for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it was developed by QQI to meet a statutory requirement for a register of all of our programmes and our awards that are in the National Framework of Qualifications. So essentially any awarding body in Ireland that makes an award on the National Framework of Qualifications are required to list it on our Irish Register of Qualifications, which makes it a really useful resource and tool for communicating all of the programmes and awards that are on the NFQ to our learners and to anyone and to the general public. Each awarding body that provides these programmes and courses leading to awards qualifications uploads their data for publication on this dedicated site. So again, I'd encourage you to look at the Irish Register of Qualifications if you're not familiar with it, and make sure to have a go of it and communicate it to anyone you think would be interested in knowing about our Irish Register of Qualifications. So the other thing I talked about was the QDR. This is the Qualifications Dataset Register. It's a central portal for qualifications, learning opportunities and accreditations, and it enables different governmental institutions and awarding bodies to publish their information about programmes and awards to the European infrastructure. The qualifications that are contained in the IRQ have been uploaded and linked to this QDR, which allows us to meet our obligations for EU requirements, and it means the information can be accessed on the Europass platform. The Qualifications Dataset Register is a tool which is developed by the European Commission to support national authorities to publish their data as linked open data, which can be made available to and used by learners, course providers, employers and credential evaluators on the Europass platform. So again, it's very much about ensuring that information is made available as easily as possible to those people who are seeking information about qualifications in Ireland, and then also that information can be accessed on the Europass platform. There's been a couple of questions about kind of the UK and Northern Ireland and the more complicated relationship that exists now as they're no longer members of the European Union. So QQI is a member of the UK and Ireland Qualifications Framework Group, which is a 5 countries group, so the 4 countries of the UK and ourselves, Ireland. And it's a group of regulators, QA bodies and government reps who share information and intelligence about our national frameworks of qualifications. We seek to kind of ensure that there's a common understanding and support for coordination and collaboration on topics and issues of mutual interests. The group produces the Qualifications Can Cross Boundaries leaflet. And although the UK is no longer part of the EU, this bilateral agreement maintains essential communications across the 5 countries in this framework group by supporting the high levels of mobility between our jurisdictions. This collaboration and support is in line with the Common Travel Area Memorandum of Understanding. So the group met just in January. We have an annual meeting, and each jurisdiction kind of chats about the various priorities and things arising in their areas, and there's lots of commonalities. A common one that was discussed was the impact of COVID-19 on assessment, particularly for school level qualifications and vocational and technical education, and that the importance of kind of navigating the changing regulatory framework during the pandemic relied heavily on collaboration between awarding organisations and their regulatory bodies, which is similar here in Ireland. A common theme that has come up is micro-credentials, and I'm sure everyone is familiar with the rise and discussion around micro-credentials, and there's certainly kind of concern or chat about the consistency and transferability across jurisdictions. So this group has been chatting a little bit about how each jurisdiction is approaching micro-credentials. There was an awful lot of conversation about recognition of prior learning and its role in accessing further and higher education. There is a review of recognition of prior learning EU guidelines happening as well, so that information will be shared with our colleagues in the other UK countries. And then things that I've already chatted about were kind of the inclusion of new awarding bodies or new awards into their national frameworks, and the importance of having databases and registers of programme data to share information. So that you can see that our priorities are reflected potentially in our UK colleagues' priority lists as well, and it's very much focused on that strategic priority of information and learning opportunities as much as possible. So I mentioned the Qualifications Can Cross Boundaries leaflet. That compares qualifications across the national boundaries, and major qualifications at each level are broadly compared across jurisdictions. So it's useful to understand how a level on our framework translates to a level on a framework in one of the other UK jurisdictions. And I think Catherine has just popped the link to the Qualifications Can Cross Boundaries leaflet into the chat as well. So it's a useful conversation because obviously we do have high mobility in terms of education and employment across these jurisdictions. So it is important to keep this leaflet relevant. So that is kind of a high level whistle-stop tour of the work we're doing in the European level. And I think Angela is going to chat a little bit more about Europass than I have. I focus very much on the EQF and its relationship to our framework and the IRQ. But I will stop sharing now, and thanks very much.
Thank you. Just before that, if there are any questions or comments that anybody wishes to raise with Orla, obviously there's quite a lot of complex activities there that she's given a very high-level overview on. But at a very practical level, I'd make a comment about the IRQ. This was about, I think it was just in October, the NARIC office got an inquiry from China in relation to a holder of a qualification that had been issued just after the establishment of the Technological University of the Shannon. So the student obviously had graduated and got their beautiful new certificate, and obviously had travelled back to China very quickly. So within about 2 or 3 weeks, they had to go and get verification of their qualification back in their own jurisdiction. And we got a call from the relevant department, to know what was this new university. And we were able then to say to them, look, we have this new resource. It's called the IRQ, the Irish Register of Qualifications. And at the time, it was still Athlone and Limerick. But now we're working on the actual transition now to get that data onto the IRQ. So we have it very, very clearly labelled. So you can see, I suppose, from a point of view of an information resource that becomes a very valid, accurate and verifiable resource for users of qualifications. And it's not just in Ireland that this goes far, far away very quickly. So, it's just one of those examples that kind of took me by surprise when I saw it originally. And I think it works quite well when we're talking about the IRQ. And then the QDR, and we'll hear a little bit more about the QDR after this from Koen. But again, we're playing our part as members of the European community by having the information from the IRQ connecting to the QDR. And again, it's for learners essentially, and for anybody from the general public who wishes to source a programme in Ireland, that the QDR data will be available to them, and it's based on the IRQ information. So there are sort of a 3-step process involved, and it's not an easy one, I suppose, at the very beginning when we have to set up new systems and procedures, but we are obviously working on that and getting there with the relevant data resources as well being there to help us. And it's very much, some of it is an IT job where we have to connect in different systems from Ireland to the European platforms, which is not always easy. And but about 10 or 12 countries at this stage, I think, have connected in at European level. So Ireland is one of those at this stage. There was a couple of things I also wanted to mention to you in relation to, I suppose, other European work that we would be involved with in QQI. I did have a small couple of slides just to use as prompts for myself. If you just want to bear with me now, I just want to just pull them up here. Sorry, no, that's, I need to, here we are here. Sorry, now just get this right. Just to give myself a couple of prompts there, I wanted to remind you of the qualifications that I just want to go back to the first one here. Within the unit that Orla and I are working in, we have a number of areas which I suppose are complementary to each other, and we are recently only begun to work together. So we are rolling out, I suppose, our projects under a number of particular areas, and as Orla said, information is very much the strategic priority for QQI, and the groupings of areas of responsibility that we have in our portfolio are all of that, really. They are around information for learners, they're around information about the framework qualifications, and they're about enabling, I suppose, people to, learn and to progress through our education system, if you like, having this particular, having these good resources available to them. And that would be my priority, I suppose, in the next couple of years, is to focus very much on learner opportunities and having the kind of information resources available to people at the appropriate level. So, I would value your feedback here today, and I would value, connectivity with you as well. So that's one very good reason to be here today, is so that we can establish good connections with the right people in all of the relevant institutions that we're dealing with here. There was one or two other points I wanted to make to you as well in terms of other areas that we're working on. And in the recognition area, I know my colleague Andrina Wafer is with us this morning as well, and I might ask her just to give us one or two comments about some of the work that she's doing. But the area where she's responsible for international recognition includes the work of NARIC Ireland, which we would have spoken about before. And there's very much interesting project work going on there, which will be complementary to a lot of the work that's going on, obviously, in QQI and in many of the institutions and guidance supports that are here listening this morning. One of the projects that I was involved in myself was an area, it's called Fraud Scan, where again, it's about, I suppose, the proliferation of fraudulent certificates that would be available and presented perhaps from time to time to institutions. And it's about developing a database of fraudulent examples of material that have been presented to the various institutions around the world, in fact. There would also be another project where, again, micro-credentials and how best that they can be recognised and, I suppose, given credit arrangements for at institutional level. Again, there's another project that would be going on as well. So, but again, there are our website will have all of that information for you. So I would certainly recommend that you have a look at the website and see what might be there. There's also an interesting project about the Diploma Supplement, and again, for those of you who issue the Diploma Supplement to graduates, digitization of the Diploma Supplement is something that's on the agenda now, and we are looking to work with our European colleagues on that. And I hope to come back to you, I suppose, in the near future, about this and about how that might be achieved for our institutions issuing the Diploma Supplement, because of the fact that, again, it's a link to Europass as well, and it's a link to the fact that the Europass platform can facilitate digital credentials, and that can be facilitated by people. So we have about 10 minutes left here now at this particular point in time, and what I was going to suggest is that if there's any final comments that people want to make before we break for a cup of coffee. I desperately need a cup of coffee, and I'm sure most of you are the same. If there are any final comments now, I would like to invite you to make any comments right now, perhaps. So on what's gone before us now for the last hour and a half almost. So is there anybody who would like to step up and turn on their camera and make a comment or two? All very quiet out there. I will mention, and I think I was asking Catherine maybe to put into the chat, but there is some work going on with Orla Ní Ceallaigh, Catherine Walsh, who's in our unit here as well, and myself and Jennifer, working on developing a booklet, you might say, which will be learner focused or user focused on European areas. Now, I have a comment from Kevin O'Shea. He has his hand up. So, Kevin, I will welcome you to join and ask any questions or make any comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. Just a question, perhaps for Orla Barry. I don't know whether she'll be able to answer, but she mentioned the listed awarding bodies been included on the NFQ, and I know the bill, I think, was signed into law by the President in 2019. I just don't fully understand what, I suppose it's more probably a question for maybe the Minister or someone else. What's the next step in the process for a bill in the Oireachtas when it's signed by the President, or do you know? I don't know. Is it like...
It's always a hard question.
But I thought the sitting bills, the listed awarding bodies were going to be included, and that was signed by the President. But I'm just wondering what the next stage is.
So the next stage would be commencement orders for sections of the legislation, and there has been commencement of parts of the legislation, but we haven't had commencement on the sections relevant to listed awarding bodies or kind of the interrelated functions that arose from the amended legislation. So so once commencement happens, you have to do it. And I suppose what we're doing in QQI at the minute is building the preparatory work that would underpin such a scheme. And once we're ready with kind of our policies and processes in place, then the Minister can issue his commencement order, which would bring the legislation to life essentially, and then we'd hit the ground running. So it's that's it. Like QQI are doing the work that would enable the Minister to commence that relevant piece of legislation.
Okay, no, I understand. Thank you. Thanks, Orla.
No problem.
There's a good bit to be done, a good bit of work to be done. I see. And did you want to say something, Anne? Anne Doyle? No, she turned on her camera. Andrina has made a comment, and Andrina is essentially for NERIC 2022, a broad scene, lots happening in the recognition of prior learning area and the validation of non-formal learning space. I don't think we can underestimate what's going on in the validation of non-formal and informal learning space, because I think there's a lot going on in that particular area, led by many coming along in many dimensions. All you have to do is try to follow some of it on Twitter at the moment, and you can see that there's so much going on, all in the right direction. So if anyone wants to make any further comment on that, I would welcome any further comments. Okay, I think if I'm not getting any further feedback from anybody, I am going to suggest now that we will take a break, and that you can get a coffee and come back to us here at 11:15. We have obviously a few minutes just to refresh ourselves and get ready for the next session, because the next session will be a good one. So thank you so much for your time so far, and I will close down the shop for a few moments and get a coffee, and we'll see you all back here at 11:15. Okay, thank you so much. Well, it's 11:14, and I hope everybody has got some refreshments and are ready to take on the next challenge with our speaker, Kun, from the European Commission. And I just wanted to check that people are back in. Maybe somebody could give me a wave back. We have over 56 people on the call. So I have a hand up here saying that people are back in, and I hope you've refreshed yourselves. Thank you. Yes, we have a few hands waving at me. Great. All the challenges of working from virtual meetings is that you don't know what's happening out there. You're kind of in this dark space. Anyway, welcome back, everybody. And I am now going to hand over to my colleague, Roisin Doherty from SOLAS. And Roisin is going to chair the session, the second half of this session, and introduce our speaker and say a few words. So without I would hand over to you, Roisin, and thank you
you.
very much for doing that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Angela. Yeah, Roisin Doherty here from SOLAS. I'm the Director of Inclusion Learner Support with SOLAS, the Further Education and Training Authority, and absolutely delighted to be here today. I've learned so much on those previous sessions, and no doubt I'm going to learn an awful lot more, but I just have to congratulate everybody. It's just a wonderful opportunity for us all to just share information and network and find out new trends across the country and across the European Union, etc. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker here, who will have far more interesting things to say than I. Kuan Noden is the team lead for the transparency and the recognition of skills and qualification with the EU Commission. He's been working in that area for over 20 years in the area of policy, public policy, research, integration, development, research, and I just really can't wait to have your presentation, Kuan, and I'm going to hand over the floor to you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Roisin, and yeah, hello to everybody. I'm happy to be here in your meeting, and I'm sure you had already very interesting discussion this morning. And yeah, I will try to add a European dimension to this. And I have prepared a presentation that you will also, of course, receive that yeah, aims at giving you an overview of the main things that are happening. I will now share my screen with you. Yes, should work. Okay. Do you see it?
Yes, yes, we see that. Are you on slideshow?
Yes.
And I go on slideshow. And I hope that you can still, I hope that my slides are moving. Yeah? Okay.
Yes.
This is my second, okay, so seems to work. Teams usually works quite well. Okay, so I'll try in about half an hour. So please organizers stop me if I'm too long. To share with you what we are doing, and I hope that this is also, of course, of relevance for your work. Now, first of all, what is the context in which we are working on skills and on tools also for transparency of skills and qualifications? What is the context at European level? Now, first of all, we see, of course, over the years that atypical forms of work are increasing. And this is related to the fact that overall, 4 out of 10 Europeans don't have, let's say, the standard traditional work pattern of permanent employment with an employer. And this includes the platform workers, but it also includes people, of course, in shorter term contracts. Secondly, what is still an ongoing phenomenon is more frequent professional transitions. And this is still occurring, but according to data, we know that in 19 out of 22 member states, for the last couple of years, last 10 years, there has been increase in professional transitions independent from other factors. Thirdly, there is still shifting employment, of course, between sectors. Less mining, less agriculture, more healthcare, more IT, more services in general. And there are, of course, also the demographic changes that are ongoing since long in every country. Aging population, ratio of working population and retired population is getting worse in terms of financing pension systems. And in all of this, of course, to adapt and to cope with these changes, there are shifting skills needs that we can observe, because also within same occupations, the skills needs are changing. And nowadays you need IT skills in nearly every profession, which of course doesn't mean that everybody needs to become an IT specialist. Now, some of the policy challenges that we have are here. There are several issues that we can note. Employers, they are reporting difficulties in finding employees with the right skills. I think you hear this quite often in the news now, also that the economy is getting a bit better when we are getting out of COVID. And of course, this happens in a context where you would need to accelerate digital and green transition. So this is of course not very good. Then secondly, overall, we see also that we have a low adult learning participation. 21 out of 27 member states did not reach the adult learning target of that was fixed at European level for 2020. So we see that some countries are doing well, basically in Northern Europe, also Estonia, also the Netherlands. But then in all the others, they didn't achieve that target. Then there is also, and this already relates to this atypical employment form, there is uneven support also for workers in learning, because those who have a permanent contract with an employer often can benefit from job-related and employer-sponsored training. But this is not the case for the others. And then also we observed that there is insufficiently attractive supply. Many learners also reported, I mean, not all learners are motivated also to learn. That's another issue. There are also time and money constraints. Now, of course, in this context, in terms of skills policies, the Commission has done a lot of work, as you all know. And we need to see this work also in the broader policy context. And one of the elements is the European Pillar of Social Rights and also the action plan that was agreed last year. And the European Pillar of Social Rights really has 20 principles, but the first one of these is on the right to education, training, and lifelong learning. So this is really our policy compass, a key element of the policy compass when we talk about skills policies at European level. Now, below this, on this slide, you see, of course, the different elements that are there and have been worked upon by the European Commission, and they are all very much skills related. There is the European Green Deal that was adopted at the beginning of the current Commission, so in 2020. Also the agreement on the digital decade. More people need, of course, everybody actually needs at least basic digital skills. The Digital Education Action Plan was adopted last year. The European Research Area is there, the European Education Area, and the European Skills Agenda was also, of course, a crucial element in this, also adopted in July of last year. And the European Skills Agenda makes the connection to these different other policy initiatives, because the skills for the green transition really links up the European Green Deal and the need to get to a transition towards a more green economy and the skills agenda. The same goes for digital skills. They are referred to in the skills agenda, but of course also in the digital decade, digital education action plan with targets, for example, and further action skills for jobs, very much related to the industrial and SME strategies. And of course, lifelong learning, very much related to the European education area and also STEM European research area. And then at the bottom, I indicated lifelong guidance, because in order to have the whole system work, of course, it's crucial to have a good lifelong guidance system. So this is just to show how the overall policy objectives and guides are linked also with the different initiatives. And of course, when we talk about skills, the European Skills Agenda is quite in the middle. Now let's move on now, because in my presentation, I prepared a bit about the European Skills Agenda, and I will zoom in into particular actions of the Skills Agenda in particular. So, as I already said, increasing policy attention is there for skills, in particular through the European Pillar of Social Rights, and an action plan in order to implement the pillar was adopted and agreed by heads of state and government last year in March. And they agreed on a target, namely that by 2030, at least 60% of adults should participate in training every year. And the latest figure we have across European of 2016 is at 37.4%. So it's a very, very ambitious target. I'm not sure it will be achieved, of course, in 2030, but without ambitious targets, I would say it's better not to have any target. Now, let's now take a closer look at the skills agenda itself, adopted in July 2020. And really, the skills agenda, what does it do? It sets the agenda on Commission actions in the field of skills. So these were announced in July 2020, and since then they have been implemented. You can recognize there are three priorities. The first one is to strengthen collective action on skills. If you want to do it well, you need to have all parties on board. Public authorities, stakeholders, from employers and also unions, but also the education and training stakeholders all need to actually work together. Secondly, as a priority, there is a need to align skills with labor market needs. And in this context, the skills agenda announced actions on skills strategy, skills intelligence, the VET, the Vocational Education and Training Council recommendation that was already adopted, but also European universities and work related to digital skills. And the third priority is to, of course, empower individuals to make sure that also individuals can have offers for training, that there are tools also that make skills visible at national level, but also across countries, because in the end, of course, we still have mobility of learners and workers in Europe, and that also reflects the added value of European action. Now, I will zoom into some of these actions in particular, a bit the Pact for Skills, then I will focus more in particular on the individual learning accounts proposals, micro-credentials, the new Europass, and I will finish off with a few other points as well that are maybe not part of the skills agenda of 2020, but that are part, I would say, of the overall skills agenda, namely actions that were initiated in the previous skills agenda of 2016 under the previous Commission. Now, first of all, Pact for Skills. So this is an initiative that was launched in 2020, November 2020. It exists for more than 1 year now. And really, this is the priority under which there is collective action ongoing, private and public organizations, social partners, education and training providers who agree on a sectoral level to concrete commitments in relation to training and skill development. And many parties are, of course, joining the Pact for Skills, and the focus there is to promote a culture of lifelong learning, building strong skills partnerships, and also monitoring skills supply demand, and also to anticipate skills needs. So you see the skills intelligence coming through there. Where do we stand regarding the Pact? So far, over 500 parties are signatory to the Charter, including also about 200 concrete commitments. All member states are in one way or the other represented by stakeholders committed to the Pact. And we see a large variety of stakeholders there, multinationals, but also local training providers. And about 100 of them are training providers. So this action is about 1 year old. It's a lot about commitments, pledges, and it will, we consider that it has been successful so far, and it will further continue, of course. But I will now move on to and zoom in to some of the other actions. Firstly, starting with the individual learning accounts. So what we have here is that the Commission has presented a proposal for a Council recommendation on the setting up of individual learning accounts. What does a Council recommendation mean? So the Council is actually the body at the European level that represents the governments, and more formally speaking, even ministers. The Commission has proposed a recommendation of the Council that is addressed to the member states, but also contains invitations to the Commission to certain actions, to undertake certain actions. This proposal was adopted by the Commission on the 10th of December of last year and is currently under negotiation in the Council working group. And more in particular, the Social Questions Working Party is dealing with it. So a Council recommendation is agreed by the Council. Of course, the Commission is there at the negotiating table. It's based always on a proposal of the European Commission, and the outcome is, recommendations to the member states. And of course, we as Commission always sees this as a political commitment by the member states to implement it. Where do we stand? It's currently under negotiation. The French presidency aims to finish this file under its presidency, which is lasting until June, at the end of June of this year, of 2022. Now, what is there in the proposal? First of all, there is the principle of universal support to learning, of course also differentiated. Second principle, one of accumulation and transferability of learning entitlements. And the idea is to use individual learning accounts, to use those rights also in transitions from job to job, but also in times of unemployment. And also, and that's an important European dimension, that it is possible to keep this entitlement temporarily when you are abroad, or even use this entitlement from abroad. And of course, we know nowadays in terms of learning offers that when you are online, it doesn't matter from where you learn. Like the presentation I'm giving today, I give it from Brussels, from my home, but I could have given it from wherever, as long as I have a good connection. Now, the recommendations to member states included in the proposal, and this is what the Commission would like to see, is that member states are recommended, to set up individual learning accounts for every individual covered by the scope of the recommendation, to ensure also adequate annual provision for every individual learning account, and to provide additional individual training entitlements to those that are most in need of up and reskilling. Part of the proposal is an enabling framework, which has been designed, and this enabling framework contains several elements that would make that the system is working. So member states are invited to set up, also as part of their commitment, a registry of eligible learning offers under the individual learning account. And of course, these must be trustworthy, quality assured training opportunities. Secondly, they are invited to set up also a single national portal that is easily accessible via mobile devices. Then a third element is that member states are invited also to ensure that there is paid training leave for employees. And this is not just falling out of the air. There is an ILO convention on training leave provisions, and this exists this convention has been signed by 12 out of the member states, but about 24 out of 27 altogether have already some training leave provisions in their labor law. Then, of course, this would not work without a good system of guidance, providing information, counseling individuals to get to the training that is fitting the person, either for concrete job-related reasons, but also sometimes for changing professional direction, I would say. And of course also validation, because of course you do training and you need to make the outcomes of training visible. The Council recommendation doesn't go into further detail of what kind of training that should exactly be. This is of course up to the member states, but training should be quality assured, and the results should be validated. We could imagine making a link with micro credentials that also micro-credentials courses would be eligible for funding. A third element, a set of elements, there is also EU support for member states to implement the individual learning account. So there is a lot of EU funding available, and there are different sources. So the Council recommendation does not go along with a specific, let's say, earmarked budget, but invites member states to make use of existing funds. Of course, the social fund, the regional development fund, but also the Just Transition Fund, technical support instrument, and also the recovery and resilience facility that was set up and agreed in order to cope with COVID, and where there is an enormous amount of money related to or available also under national reform programs. Then in terms of implementation, the Commission will support also by facilitating mutual learning, developing guidance material, but also, and I think this is an important point as well, to further develop the Europass platform to support the recognition of ILA-funded training. And this also includes, for example, the idea to interconnect the national single portals at European level through the learning opportunities. Good, I will now move on to the other proposal that was also adopted by the Commission in December 2021 on the same date. And of course, I can reassure you that also internally we have been working very closely together in order to make sure that these two Council recommendations are fully compatible in terms of language. So they come from, actually, the micro-credentials one is a joint one under Commissioners Gabriel, responsible for education and research, and Commissioner Nicolas Schmid, responsible for social affairs and inclusion, but also, and that's not in his title, for vocational education, training and adult learning. The micro-credentials Council recommendation, so same story, it's also under negotiation now with the French presidency, not in the social questions working party, but in the education committee. Joint initiative of also at the services level between DG Education and Culture and DG Employment. And the micro-credentials initiative is officially called Council recommendation on a European approach for micro-credentials in relation to lifelong learning and employability. Yeah, the idea is that of this proposal is that micro-credentials can be used to complement and enhance education, training, lifelong learning, and employability ecosystem. So it really targets both lifelong learning and employability. It doesn't seek, because there were some worries, of course, also expressed when we were preparing this initiative, it doesn't seek, of course, to replace existing systems or existing qualifications or traditional qualifications. This was a worry expressed in particular by the unions. No, rather it seeks to complement what already exists, and there is a need for additional training, as we have seen, and we think that micro-credentials, the European approach, can play a role in there. So it really aims to establish a common European approach to the ongoing emerging provision of micro-credentials, to make sure also that micro-credentials are transparent across borders, that they can be trusted, and so forth. Okay, I am now moving to the next slide. I thought I was a bit stuck with my presentation, but it seems to go. So yeah, outline of the proposal. Really, there are building blocks in the proposal that include a common definition of micro-credentials. I'm not showing it today, but there was a lot of discussion on a possible common definition. And of course now, in the context of negotiations with member states, the common definition, of course, needs to be endorsed or will be changed. But my guess would be that it will mostly be kept as it is. A second building block are standard elements, so elements of micro-credentials. Then you have to think of the learning outcomes, the level, if that is relevant, the field, and so on, and where it is. So you see immediately also the link to the information, to the exchange of information on micro-credentials. And also another building block is principles for the design and issuance of micro-credentials. Recommendations in this recommendation are also again addressed to member states. They are invited to develop ecosystems for micro-credentials and also to deliver on the potential of micro-credentials. And also there is a Commission support elements there, again, including also the further development of Europass to support the implementation of the Micro-Credentials Council recommendation. Then you have to think of, again, learning opportunities related to micro-credentials, but also the potential use of European digital credentials for learning. And also in that context, we are already thinking ourselves about possibly building a micro-credential stacker, so a tool that would facilitate the accumulation of micro-credentials. Then focus, I don't need to repeat, is on education, training, skills policies and on active labor market policies. Now, when we go into the ecosystems for micro-credentials, you see here that it's very broad because it addresses formal learning. And we know that many higher education institutions are working on micro-credentials, including university alliances. But also, the aim is to support the exploration, further work on micro-credentials by VET providers, in particular in the context of the centers of vocational excellence. Then it covers both non-formal and also informal learning next to formal learning. So we believe that micro-credentials are also often provided outside the formal education and training sector by employers, social partners, and so on. But that training that is provided there is not necessarily called micro-credentials. Then also you see again there adaptation of validation procedures to make sure that they recognize the reality of micro-credentials. And then you see a third block of the ecosystem, which is about quality and transparency. Delivering on the potential of micro-credentials. Under education, training and skills policies, the Council recommendation there refers to the publication of micro-credentials in national catalogues, to the improvement of access, transitions in education and training for all learners. So it's really a cross-education level and type initiative, not just addressing higher education, but also vocational education and training, also the whole field of adult learning. So that's the lifelong learning dimension. Also there, an invitation to use micro-credentials in order to improve digital skills and green skills. By the way, the Commission is also working and has been working on a competence framework, for example, for skills for the green transition. Use also micro-credentials for teacher training and so on. And then when we look at active labor market policies, really we see a role for micro-credentials to address skills challenges, skills bottlenecks, to upskill and reskill workers, of course, closely linked here with the individual learning accounts council recommendation, with the possibility to support certain target groups, self-employed, again, also there I would see an ELA link, vulnerable groups, youth, and to meet, of course, also the regulatory requirements, licenses, mandatory training and permits. Of course, also there, one would imagine that training, leading, or that is needed to keep up licenses could also be micro-credentials. Now, Commission support, there again, develop and adapt existing EU tools. So DGR colleagues are going to look at the Bologna tools, support for cooperation between member state stakeholders. We can there think also of peer learning, further research and data collection. Also CEDEFOP, the European agency in Thessaloniki, is working on a very extensive study on micro-credentials in the labor market. And then Europass, the Europass platform, will support the technical implementation at the European level. Now, I move on now to my next slide. I present quite a couple of slides, so you tell me, Rosin and Angela, whether I'm behind schedule or then I will increase the speed. But my
no, I think it's good. We need to hear it. We need to hear it all.
Okay.
Yes.
Good. Then the next point that I wanted to share with you is, of course, that as part of the skills agenda, the new Europass platform was launched in July 2020, and this succeeds to the old Europass platform, which mostly was concentrated on the Europass CV and which existed since 2004 and was run by CEDEFOP as European agency in the area of development of training in vocational education and training. But the new Europass platform is really fundamentally different. It is the old Europass, but then adapted to the technical requirements of today. And instead of a CV, there is now an e-portfolio, and this e-portfolio is doing many more things than just creating your CV. It allows you to basically to structure your skills, to also do some self-assessment. For example, most recently, there was a self-assessment module on digital skills included in Europass. You can also reflect, of course, on your goals, on your preferences. Then the Europass platform allows you to compare some options, to explore also. And if you want from your e-portfolio, you can ask for job suggestions, for suggestions for learning opportunities. However, of course, these suggestions that you get on learning opportunities depend a lot on the data on learning opportunities that are interconnected with Europass. And for this, we rely on the member states to share their data. And this is also the part where in future, we would hope that also these national platforms related to the individual learning accounts would connect. And then, of course, I mean, there is a tool for individuals to support them to prepare the CVs on the basis of the e-portfolio, to prepare also applications, but also as part of the e-portfolio, there is a library and an e-wallet, a wallet in which, for example, individuals can store their digital credentials and where they can manage other documents. And the Europass platform, I must say, is also the official platform for the European Qualifications framework for lifelong learning. And when we go to the next slide, which you can see here, you see the different Europass components. There is the e-portfolio, I talked already about it. Currently, we have a bit over 3 million individuals who do have a Europass account, Europass e-portfolio. And Europass, we must say, is available in all EU languages. So it is available, of course, it's not available in Irish, I think, but it's available in English, it's available in German, but also in Lithuanian, Romanian, Bulgarian, and so on. So in that sense, it's very accessible. There is a Europass info site where you find information on qualifications frameworks, where we have a comparison tool also to compare national qualifications frameworks. We need to further develop this part, in particular in relation to the information that we have there on guidance and on validation, for example, and on recognition of qualifications. There is a digital skills test that was recently added. I talked about this in order to self-assess your digital skills. This test is based on the digital competence framework, which is really the EU reference framework for digital skills. This is, of course, a self-assessment. It doesn't give any certification. Then there is the qualifications data register and the repository where member states share data on qualifications, on learning opportunities, but also we have now there an accreditation database, and that accreditation database is important for the other element that you find on the bottom, on the right side bottom, namely that there is an infrastructure in the Europass platform for digital credentials. And this includes a set of standards, services, software allowing institutions to issue digital credentials, to issue qualifications that are tamper-proof. Yeah? I will come to that a bit more still in the presentation. Now, first, where do we stand regarding sharing qualifications information? So far, we have 18 countries that are sharing information on qualifications, including Ireland. So we are very happy to have the QQI database also interconnected with Europass. But you also still see from this picture that a couple of countries is of course still missing. Spain has not yet referenced to the EQF, but we have Italy, we have Romania, Bulgaria, a few Balkan countries, Finland, Norway missing, Austria missing, but we are working on those. You can see that we increased from about 11 between July 2020 to 18 end of 2021. So if we grow with the same pace, then I trust that in a couple of years we will have almost all countries included there. The same cannot be said yet exactly for sharing learning opportunities, where we are a bit less successful so far, but you can also see from the figure that in July 2020 we were really at a very, very low figure of 2. We are currently at 7 with another 3 countries testing. We have a working group that we set up, a project group on learning opportunities, in which we work together with the member states, and Ireland is an active participant in that project group. We are very happy with that, where we see, okay, what is our vision for this? How can we improve the system? We have to do some homework on our end also, namely to ensure a better data visibility. We have already done some work there, but it can be still further improved. Also search functionalities and a better integration with the e-portfolio, because in the end the purpose is of course that people, if they ask for suggestions, that they get really relevant suggestions, and not suggestions where individuals think, oh, okay, interesting to have this suggestion, but I don't think it's very relevant for my case or for my skills or for my interests. Okay, so this is really ongoing work, and we try really, my ambition is that we get at a double by the end of this year to what we currently have, but we want to have a bit more. But we put our energy into this. Then I am moving to European Digital Credentials for Learning. So this is one of the new components that didn't exist at all in the old Europass. And we consider this also to be central to the skills agenda and to the education action plan, but also to the European data strategy. Now, the legal base for this work is the Europass decision, which invited the Commission to set up a system for authentication of qualifications. And what we have done so far is that we have set up an infrastructure on European Digital Credentials for Learning that follows the standards of of the European learning model that we also have developed. So the European learning model contains many data categories. It's very much based in the beginning on Annex 6 of the EQF recommendation that contains elements of information that you should have if you exchange electronic data on qualifications. So in the European Digital Credentials for Learning, this has been transformed into the European Learning Model, and the European Learning Model obviously is much more extensive than the Annex 6 of the EQF recommendation. A strong element of it is that it is linked to international standards, namely the W3C verifiable credentials. It's a bit a nerdy term. For those interested, I invite you to check and to look it up. You will find it immediately if you Google. Then we have a couple of services in this infrastructure. Namely, there is an issuer for digital credentials. There is also the wallet linked to the Europass account. There is a viewer in which you can see how a digital credential made with the issuer will look like. And there is an accreditation database, which technically speaking is in the QDR, but where there will be accreditation information on qualifications, and that will allow our infrastructure to check really that there is accreditation of the institution that wishes to issue a digital qualification. For this, we are closely working with the DCAR, so the database of the European Quality Assurance Register in the field of higher education, because they have a wealth of accreditation information. So we try to make the link, and like this, we also avoid double work for something that already exists. Now, it's also possible not to use our services directly, but to use the standards and to use and download some software that is available. The functions of the digital credentials for learning are really to identify the learners who will be awarded the credential, to issue, to store the credential securely, can be in the Europass wallet, doesn't need to be, because, I mean, there is no way, of course, that at Commission level we would like to impose the use of Europass. This is voluntary, but of course we are happy when people use it and think that it is a good service. Then it allows you, from the e-portfolio, it's very easy to share your digital credential with an employer or an educational institution. And when doing that, the verification of the credential is done automatically, so the receiver sees that the credential is authentic and valued. And some further technical improvements. Okay, this is a lot of stuff, but I want to draw your attention to the fact that we are basically ready with the European digital credentials to become also to have the to be applied in the context of the Diploma Supplement. So the Diploma Supplement as a digital credential. We have been working also with you, Angela, on this, of course, and with the Europass centers and the enigmatic community. So this is near ready, and we will soon be happy also to demonstrate how it works and how it should be used. Also, just for the more technical people among you, we want to have JSON support introduced in the context of European digital credentials for learning, because that allows us to have true native verifiable credentials that can also be used in the context of blockchain. Yeah? So that is very important for the blockchain ledger. That adds an additional security, we would say. And then in the future, I would like to raise your attention to the two things, the micro-credential stacker. So we try to, we aim to build that in order to support the micro-credentials policy. And also the Europass mobility. We're in discussion with the Europass national centers, but we want to digitalize, and I think we must digitalize the Europass mobility, because if we don't do it, I believe it's the end also of the Europass mobility, because there will be other digital tools that will surpass it. So we have to find there a good compromise with learning mobility more generally, and we are closely working with DG EAC to find a good solution under the Erasmus Plus program. Few words on the European learning model. I already talked about it. This is the essential thing, I would say. This is the semantic interoperability between tools that relate and that deal with learning. And we have 250 properties in the European learning model that describe organizations, details of the credential owner, and so on. What is our ambition is to come to a single European learning model in Europe. So the colleagues, the countries also that work on the European blockchain service infrastructure, the diploma case there, and also the diploma case for the digital identity wallet, they already use the European learning model as their semantic model to describe properties in the field of learning. We are also working with the world of higher education, because there is also the ELMO, which is another learning model in the area of higher education. Our next version, 3.0 of the European learning model, will take on the properties also of ELMO. And I think when that is done, we should really aim to have a single data model, because this is needed in order to support interoperability. Now, areas of EDC adoption, I will not go into the details. I just want to highlight that it is used by Luxembourg to issue VET qualifications. So all students in VET do get a digital credential in addition to their paper certificate. And this is part of the Digital Luxembourg strategy. Very good project. They won a prize even with it. And also Malta recently issued more than 2,000 transcripts of records. And for the rest, it's used by quite a number of parties. We have about 60 organizations also piloting it, early adopters, and the European universities are also active, and we have in particular the European Consortium of Innovative Universities that is very active. That includes also, I think, a university in Dublin. I move on because I see that the clock is ticking, and I want to give you, of course, occasion also to ask some questions. Now, what was not part of the skills agenda 2020, strictly speaking, in terms of actions, was validation of non-formal and informal learning. Of course, it's being referred to, it's mainstreamed, it's cross-cutting in European skills policies. And this is what I wanted to share with you. So we are very actively working on validation, again, with a lot of support, and we're very grateful for this from the Irish side. Andrina, we had a very successful event, also late November, with a high level of Irish participation. Now, if we look at the storyline of validation, we see that it all started in 2004. And then in 2012, there was the Council recommendation inviting member states to really set up arrangements for validation. And that is still the political, the legal act that forms the base for our work. What are we doing? We are currently working on new European guidelines, on updated European guidelines on validation. They should be ready in the course of this year. And we also have recently started the procedure to have another EU inventory. So reflecting the state of play of validation across Europe. This should be ready by 2023. All of this we do in close cooperation with the EQF advisory group and also with the project group on validation that exists in the context of the EQF advisory group. Now, these are results from the evaluation that was carried out in 2020. To see, okay, where does the recommendation stand? And that evaluation revealed that all member states had taken action. So a lot going on, but still some challenges. People have not everywhere access to validation, not necessarily they have information. Guidance may not always be effective, neither the outreach. So still a lot of work ongoing. And at European level, we try to support these processes with the project group, where we have member state reps, experts, other experts, but also together with CDFOP again in Thessaloniki, and also the European Training Foundation, because they will look at it in the context of the partner countries that they have in Northern Africa and Central Asia. Now, the European guidelines already talked a little bit about it. What the new update should do, the third edition, the current one is from 2015. It should capture the most experiences made in recent years, like digitalization, and to make the guidelines available to stakeholders in different positions and different levels in different organizations. Then the inventory, as you can see here, update, as I already said, we just launched the technical specifications. We're waiting for the green light by our financial unit. I hope we get it very soon, and then we will launch the procedure there. Then also not to forget about lifelong guidance. Yeah. Now, as Commission, we are perhaps ourselves not so very active in the area of career guidance, I must say. Because this is also very much a domain of national competence. We hardly have any competence, but of course you will see that in many of the country recommendations, there is a prominent role for guidance. When you look at the ELA recommendation, for example, and we of course work closely together with CDFOP, that has and is responsible for the organization of CareersNet, which is an expert network for lifelong guidance and career development. They do a lot of studies and research papers, and we work, of course, a lot together with them. In the context of CareersNet, an inventory was made of lifelong guidance systems and practices. And there are 36 forthcoming records. So these are basically country descriptions where the system is. And what is very good is that these records are provided by national experts, and they are also updated on a regular basis. Then just drawing attention to you to a more recent publication on digital transitions and lifelong guidance. I think this is a very good source of information on what is happening in the field. And then finally, on guidance, I would like to draw your attention also to the work we do together with other international organizations, OECD, the ILO, also more recently the World Bank, UNESCO, and also together with the European Training Foundation in Torino, which is also an EU agency, and CEDEFOP in Thessaloniki. And in 2021, a revised edition of a joint international leaflet on investing in career guidance was adopted, aiming at working towards a common vision of the role of career guidance for individuals in different language versions available. And you see also there the link where it is available. We consider this really highly valuable as Commission because it gives us the international insights, and it helps us also to whenever there are communications or counter recommendations, for example, in the education and training field or in the public employment field, not to forget, or in the youth field, not to forget to also include their references to career guidance or to lifelong guidance. Good. Now, one thing I should never forget, of course, also in the context of such general presentation, is where what I would say is the backbone of the different European transparency tools, where that backbone tool is standing, the European Qualifications Framework for Lifelong Learning, which I think you are all familiar with, to which also the Irish National Framework for Qualifications has been referenced initially and also updated. Currently, we have 38 countries in the EQF. So that means all EU member states, 27, then Iceland, Liechtenstein and Norway, but also the candidate countries to the EU. That also includes Turkey, the Western Balkan countries, and also Switzerland. That makes altogether 38. 36 out of these have referenced their national qualifications framework. So the only EU country that is missing is Spain, but I believe they are working on this, and I hope they will be able to reference in the course of this year to close that gap. The other country is Bosnia-Herzegovina, where, okay, the country situation is more difficult. And 7 countries so far presented an updated referencing report, because, of course, you need to update your referencing from time to time in order to make sure that your existing referencing is up to date. Included in these 7 countries is also Ireland. And this is nowadays a major topic on the agenda of the work of the EQF Advisory Group. And for example, in 2 weeks' time, we will have Italy that will update its referencing report. And also France has done it, the Netherlands, and also the UK countries did it before they left the EU in order to keep their referencing also up to date. 33 countries do currently indicate EQF levels and, of course, NQF levels on their certificates, diplomas or supplements. And 22 countries indicate EQF levels on databases or registers of qualifications. Now, this we consider is a good level of implementation, but of course it can be still improved. Other areas of work in which we are third country cooperation. We currently have a project of comparing the EQF with the Ukrainian qualifications framework. This activity does, of course, go on in spite of the current international situation. We are working on international qualifications for a procedure to exchange information on how countries deal with those qualifications. We also address qualifications outside formal education and training. This is a topic which we think will become more important. Then we do work on learning outcomes. In particular, we have a project group dealing and addressing the short descriptions of learning outcomes, and then linking qualifications registers to Europass, communication, and also the NQF inventory that is maintained by CEDEFOP. Now, I'm almost at the end of my presentation. I just wanted to draw attention also to the fact that we have a couple of upcoming evaluations. So the evaluation study supporting the evaluation of the Council recommendation on upskilling pathways, so that's in the area of adult learning, is ongoing, and the public consultation there is open until the 17th of March of 2022 with a lot of questions. So especially colleagues from the adult learning community, I would really like to invite you to reply to that open public consultation. Secondly, we are in the middle of the process of launching the EQF evaluation study. That is, we had a procedure and we had our technical specifications out, and this Friday we expect to get the offers. We will then analyze those offers, evaluate and choose the one that scores the highest. And we expect to have this study starting in April, and that also the public consultation on implementation of the EQF will follow this year, Q3 2022, June, July, August, September. That will be the period of the open public consultation. There again, of course, very important to have your inputs. And finally, there is also, a bit fast, I found myself, but this is the legal text that provides it. There will be an evaluation on the Europass decision. Preparations are ongoing. We expect to start this this evaluation study in Q3, so after the summer of this year. Voilà, that was it. Thank you very much for your patience. I hope it was interesting for you, and I'm of course very happy to reply to your questions and to enter into further discussion.
Koen, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. Really, really informative. I'm going to get a copy of that and play it back to myself every week, because it just covers everything really, you know, the full breadth of the education system. So just on behalf of everybody, thank you very, very much. That was absolutely fantastic. You know, you covered everything. You covered, you know, the current challenges, then the policy context, and then all the initiatives, and brought them all together in a really, I suppose, readable session and information that we can all refer back to and have a look at. And it's been fantastic. Thank you so much. That was really, really informative. Thank you. So, Angela, do you want to, will I open it up to a few questions, or will I hand that over to Brian?
We have kind of a discussion opportunity now, certainly, if people want to raise questions, and Brian then will say a few words. So, but just if there's anybody with any burning questions that they wish to raise, I think now is your chance.
Yeah, and there was one or two questions.
Jennifer has her hand up, I think.
Do you want to go for Jennifer? Yeah, that's grand. Jennifer?
Thanks, folks. I'm not on mute this time. It's more of a comment rather than a question. So obviously, thank you, Koen. You always have all the right information, and you can make it all make sense to all of us. So thank you so much. But I think what's crucial is I will always go to the slides on lifelong guidance. And I think what's really, really crucial, and it was great that you highlighted this, that the reality of it is, while the system is being developed in education and training and VET and FET, or whatever we want to call it, apprenticeships, while the systems are developing, while the digital credentials, while the moving from a certificate to an online app, moving from, do I do a part-time course to a full-time course? The reality of it is, it means that there is a myriad of opportunities, and more and more and more and more and more information needed for somebody to make a decision about their education or career, and ultimately their life journey. And crucial to that is always going to be the availability of guidance. The availability of guidance at school level, in the FET, the further education and training in Ireland, for example, the PLC colleges, in the higher education institutes, in the training centres, in the adult guidance services, in the local employment services, and the offices of social protection through intro. For people to be able to make sense of what that information means to them, guidance is crucial. It's absolutely crucial. And it's, as I say, it's, you know, with all of this information that's available, it is hard for those of us in the business to make sense of it a lot of the time. And I think this is where it is vitally important that we recognise that provision of information online is only a teeny tiny chink of guidance service provision. It is one part of making information accessible. What is a micro-credential? What is this course? Who's running that course? Where can I do business administration? Where can I do childcare? But the reality of it is making that information, integrating it into the individual themselves, brings in what you've mentioned about the RPL. What have I worked at before? What skills have I got that I don't have a micro-credential for yet? So for me, everything always comes back to, well, how do we support the individual? And that has to be properly funded, properly developed guidance services that are led by national policy and supported by practice. So obviously, you know, I'm biased because I was part of that international group on revising the careers, investing in careers guidance. So of course I'm biased and fully support the guidance. But thank you, Con, because I think for guidance professionals and everybody in the sector to have an understanding of how wide this is and being able to filter it through for an individual, that's ultimately what a guidance counsellor does. So thank you so much for your wonderful presentation.
Brilliant, Jennifer. Thanks for that input. Thank you. Just I suppose highlighting the value of lifelong learning and the needs of individuals as opposed to systems as well. So thanks for that. Brian, did you want to come in there?
Well, I just have a question for Kun, really, and arising. And hello, Kun. Thank you so much for that presentation. When you were touching on the individual learning accounts, you mentioned about where people might take their programs, and of course, you said, well, with online learning, of course, it can be anywhere. To what extent does the Commission thinking envisage, if you like, a single market in online provision? This is obviously something that, you know, traditionally a lot of these tools were developed with the idea of mobility, and we've heard earlier on in our session today about the mobility initiatives. Now with digital mobility, but actually, it mightn't be a mobility from an Irish online provider to one outside Ireland. It might be first choice might be to go to Ireland. I can go, if I want to order products here now, I can go to amazon.fr or amazon.de rather than our default in Ireland, which is amazon.co.uk. And so similarly, you could see a situation where the online preferences would be to operate within the single market. Is that part of Commission thinking at this stage? And if so, I suppose I'm throwing this out to our colleagues here. What are the implications for domestic practice in terms of guidance, in terms of information provision, in terms of quality assurance, if we're quality assuring to offer overseas, and so on? A big topic.
Big question over to yourself, Cohen, maybe? Do you want to say a few words on that?
Yeah, okay, no, thanks, Jennifer. You are biased, I know, but you know, I appreciate what you say, and I also do agree. What is a bit difficult if you work in the European Commission, in my position, is of course that guidance is very much a national competence. So there is not so much that we can do apart from, okay, and there was the ELGPN also that existed in the past, where you were part of, in which I was also actively participating on the Commission level. But I think, and we try to do this wherever this is possible to include more references of guidance into different Commission texts. We do this really concretely. If I get a text, if our unit get a text on where we can include guidance, we will do that. So I can only agree with you. And I think for our internal narrative, you provided some very useful elements that I will try to use as well, because often what we include in texts of the Commission Council doesn't go so much further than stressing the importance that there is a good system of guidance, but what you said goes much, goes a bit more in depth. I don't think it will be off the agenda, and maybe at a certain moment there is an occasion to do a bit more. This depends also, you know, on the presidency of the EU, because they all want to set their accents. It may be that at a certain moment there is a country in the next couple of years that says, okay, I think that career guidance should be higher on the agenda. Brian, thanks for your question. I don't have a direct answer to you in factual terms, but the thought is interesting. What I think is key is, of course, that users have full information about the learning opportunities, know that are there, that the learning offer that is there is transparent in itself. And that includes, of course, transparent information on the quality assurance that preferably should be verifiable. Is it linked, for example, to an international standard and so on? I would need to check under the Digital Education Action Plan what is ongoing there. Our aim, I must say, through the Europass platform is to make sure that things are as much as possible interconnected. And in this context of transparency of information on learning offers, also the European learning model is very important because it contains the data structure elements that would allow you to provide that transparency. So it's through the data management that we can manage some transparency. Not sure that this is a satisfying answer because I cannot really provide that, but this is what are my thoughts. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks for that. Angela, well, I might go to the conversations there in the chat, if that's okay. And see, there's a point just in there from, I think it's Anne Doyle, was it? Yeah. With regard to micro-credentials, I think it might be more a national issue, but what is the issue with regard to maybe major awards versus micro-credentials, and is there a risk that we would do more micro-credentials at the risk of not undertaking general education? And I suppose I think I'm familiar with that particular example, so I might make a comment on that myself and then open it up if anybody else wants to make a comment. But I suppose there's two sides to that particular point, isn't it? It's about, I suppose, trying to encourage people, younger people, to get into that particular area and get their recognition and the motivation. But then once, I suppose, you get somebody into the system to get them hooked, and then obviously a full award obviously is much going to be more beneficial over your lifetime. And I suppose that can be a difficult point to sell to somebody, that you're better off staying in education. Obviously the higher education you have, the better it's going to be for your life outcomes, and I'm currently struggling with 3 teenagers trying to get that point across, so I can understand. So I suppose there's 2 sides of that. I suppose it's how to motivate people and how to ensure then that people do get some, I suppose, lifelong learning and continue to upskill as such. I'm not sure if that answered that particular point. I think it was Anne that mentioned that point. Andrina, do you want to come in there, Andrina?
Thanks, Roshi. No, it's just a really quick point, and it really follows from Jennifer's commentary, but also from Kuhn's. And while it is a national competence, I think, while guidance is a national competence, obviously, and individual member states do what they can do in the light of their demographic, their population, their resources, and all the rest of it. My concern is almost always for people who are outside the system. Things are simpler if you're in an institution of whatever kind. But if you're in employment, or if you're not in employment, if you're distant from education, and some of the things that we've learned about the impact of COVID and the pandemic, but that we knew even before then, in terms of just ordinary citizens trying to find their way through the world and stay employed and viable, would lead me very strongly to the conclusion that I think we need to look at the challenges of transitions from one job to another, from one, you mentioned it, Kuhn, in your one of your earlier slides, you know, that people change jobs so often, this business of transitions and multiple occupations and so on, and an eligibility for and access to guidance, not just information, but guidance. You know, the quality of information, absolutely, nobody can function without that. And as Jennifer said, it's the infrastructure, but it's the access to somebody who will actually sit and talk to you. And then some sort of, you know, relationship that you can build and say, well, how are you doing on that? Have you gone anywhere? Has it delivered anything for you? I think would be really, really helpful in a national context. And I think you know, what I hear and see in my conversations with those in institutions is a disposition towards engagement, a very strong disposition towards engagement and welcome for citizens, regardless of their age, regardless of their context, regardless of, you know, where they're coming from in terms of an institution or not. But it still doesn't do away with the need for an individual citizen to have that clarity on where can I go, how can I do it, and what am I entitled to. And I think if we were looking at our ILAs, the individual learning accounts, I think that would be something that we could really strongly push towards. Anyways, it's just a personal view, but thank you.
Thanks very much, Andrina. And Mary, have your hand up there?
Hi, and thank you very much. I mean, again, these discussions are always so kind of exciting and motivating. It's brilliant to hear, and I'm delighted to see so many guidance practitioners and in particular the College of Further Education cohort who are here. And one of the questions I think that Anne brought up, I think is really significant. Two things are important, that we need to look in terms of career resilience, career mobility, and we need, for example, to be open to and prepared to consider differences between occasional pieces of learning and full-time programs that deliver a large qualification. So in other words, they're actually what I've learned a word yesterday. I love to learn a word. The word I learned yesterday was co-production. Now, many of you may use that word, but what we're talking about, in my understanding of it, is different systems have a different functions and are valuable for different reasons. The provision of public guidance and guidance to the general public is a piece of work that is done in many different ways, but it's not coordinated. So while people may feel they have nowhere to go, sometimes they just don't know where they could go. The other side of that is that there is the underpinning of engagement, which can be facilitated by a very light touch of guidance and career building and an understanding and ownership of what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, which allows then the person to be in control of themselves as opposed to someone else orchestrating what they're being in control of. This is where it must go if we are to look at sustainable career development, if we're looking at people who need to shift and move and be willing to change what they're doing. If COVID, for example, demands that we move online, people didn't have a choice. So let us seize what is the value of that and move that into a space which has a sustainable, long-term, positive impact, as opposed to what is long-term COVID. It could be a positive thing. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, Mary, thank you very much. I'm conscious of my time now, so I'm going to probably have to hand over now back to yourself, Angela, and Brian to do a wrap up as such. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Roisin, very, very much. I know we could be here for another long while, but we haven't got the luxury. I'm going to hand over to Brian, and he's going to close out the session. So thanks very much from me and from all my team here today. I'm just hoping that we will meet people not virtually in the future, that we'll actually, maybe next time we can meet physically and in person, and we can have a lot longer panel discussion, and it'll be, much more meaningful perhaps, but I think we've done a good job. So thank you so much.